In the world of yoga, Shiva is considered the Adi Yogi, the first yogi. His wife Devi or Parvati is regarded as the first ever student of yoga. But who were these figures? Were they just enlightened humans, divine beings, or something in between? Did they even exist? The truth is far more complex, and to understand it, we need to shift our perspective. For a moment, don't think of Shiva as a person. The word Shiva simply means that which is not. It refers to everything that exists beyond human comprehension, something vast, infinite, and unknowable. In this sense, Shiva is not an individual but a cosmic principle, much like black holes or the unseen forces that govern the universe. However, legend has it that 15,000 years ago, an extraordinary yogi appeared. His presence left people in awe, and he seemed to embody the very essence of that which is not. Those who followed him gave him the name Shiva. Some saw him as the closest humanity had come to knowing the unknown. Others believed he was not merely embodying divinity, that he was divinity itself. He was the closest embodiment to divinity that anyone had ever seen up to that point. As the teachings of Adi Yogi spread, different groups of people interpreted his legacy in different and varying ways. The Shaivas are classified as those people who worship Shiva as God himself. They believe that devotion to Shiva as God would set them free from the cycle of life and rebirths. And there were Tantrics. Tantrics believed that Shiva provided techniques for liberation through breath, concentration, and meditation without any need for devotion to him whatsoever. One could liberate themselves by following Shiva's teachings, not through worship. And there were yogis. Yogis were those who felt like they needed more preparatory practices before they could follow the teachings of Shiva. These preparatory exercises included postures, breathing exercises, breathing techniques. They needed to strengthen their body, their mind, and their resolve so they had the capacity to follow Shiva's specific breathing techniques. And there was, of course, the Aghoris. The Aghoris were ascetics who rejected all worldly attachments. They lived in cremation grounds and even engaged in extreme practices, all to symbolize that nothing in the world was real. I am simplifying and leaving out a lot of information. Each of these paths that I've mentioned shared a common goal. Although they had different ideas, their common goal was liberation. They wanted to liberate themselves from what it means to be human. They had the same goal, but they differed in their approach and their beliefs. As the great Swami Vivekananda said, that the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to thee. Over time, the outside observers struggled to categorize these diverse traditions that I've just mentioned. The Western explorers, the Western traders, and eventually the colonizers found that the spiritual landscape of the Indian subcontinent deeply fascinated them, but it was really difficult to define because although there were similar themes, everyone had a very different belief and practice. Although the term Hindu predates British colonial rule, it was the British who popularized and formalized Hinduism as a singular religious identity. The word itself comes from the Sanskrit Sindhu, referring to the Indus River. Legend has it that the ancient Persians struggled to pronounce the S sound, called the people beyond the Indus the Hindus. Before colonial intervention, being a Hindu simply meant belonging to the culture and the spiritual traditions of the Indian subcontinent. And remember, this is India pre-partition. To the Westerners, to the British, it was a broad categorization, but as we know, being a Hindu was not a single religion. The British, in their efforts to classify India's population, what they did was group together a vast array of spiritual, philosophical and cultural traditions under the broad umbrella of Hinduism. Thus, at one point, being a Hindu could refer to being a yogi, those who saw Shiva as an enlightened being. Being a Hindu could include being a Buddhist, those who were the followers of Gautam the Buddha. Being a Hindu also include Muslims and Sufis, Sufism being a mystical branch of Islam. Being a Hindu also included what we now know of as Jains, the Sikhs, Tantrics, Aghoris. Being a Hindu also included Shaivas, so those who believed that Shiva was God in human form. Being a Hindu also included Vaishnavas, those who believed that Vishnu was God. For centuries, being a Hindu was about seeking the truth. If you were a Hindu, you were simply a seeker. It was not about belonging to a defined religious system. Today, however, the term Hinduism is generally used to describe Shaivas or Vaishnavas, while the other groups I mentioned earlier have now evolved into distinct religious or spiritual movements. Yoga for a long time was simply a spiritual tool which was used by different seekers to deepen their understanding of themselves and the universe. Yoga was not tied to a specific religion, nor did it require belief in any deity. Unlike religious traditions that demand adherence to specific doctrines, such as the Shaivisms who believe in Shiva as the ultimate God, or Islam's submission to Allah, yoga does not require faith in any particular divine being. Yoga only requires a willingness to practice. There is no mandatory temple in yoga. There are no real dietary restrictions or sacred texts that one must accept as the absolute truth. And if there are, or if you believe there are, they've generally been introduced to us over the years. They are not considered part of the general yogic law. In contrast, most religions have a core foundational text, but there is no core foundational text for yoga, which is why I don't classify it as a religion. I do, however, consider the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra as the foundational text for yoga in my understanding. This book is not a religious text and is not a book of dogma. It is a guide to meditation, a guide towards something greater which offers the seeker techniques which they can use to explore their own consciousness, and it really doesn't impose any particular type of belief system. I've always considered the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra as a self-help manual. Now, for me, and I fully appreciate there are people who are going to disagree, but yoga is not a religion. Yoga does not demand devotion, worship, or submission to any particular deity. It is a practice, a tool for self-discovery, clarity, and liberation. While religions have embraced yoga and incorporated yoga into their traditions, yoga itself remains open to all, regardless of faith, tradition, or background. And this brings me back to Shiva and Devi. The essence of yoga is not about religious doctrine, but about exploring one's own consciousness, just as the first seekers did when they learned from Shiva. While some see him as a god, others like me see him as the ultimate teacher who left behind techniques for human transformation. So in my own opinion as a seeker, yoga has influenced religious beliefs. Yoga, however, remains something far greater. Yoga is a timeless practice that belongs to no one and is available for everyone. As I've said many times to my students before in our yoga teacher training, when you think about religions, you define them based on their core foundational text. For example, Christians would have the Bible, Muslims would have the Quran, but yoga itself doesn't have a core foundational text, one that certainly isn't agreed upon by everyone. Some can see the foundational text of the yoga being the Bhagavad Gita. Some could see the foundational text as the Shiva Sutras, for example. There is no universally agreed foundational text in yoga. And also, the very fact that we discuss whether yoga is a religion clearly shows there are grey areas. You wouldn't ask if Islam is a religion, or if Christianity is a religion, or if Hinduism is a religion, but you do ask these questions with yoga, and you can also ask these questions with Buddhism, which shows that there are so many grey areas and there is so much more for us to understand. But once you get deeper into the philosophy, the man-made philosophy of yoga, you start to realize that yoga today, and the reason there is so much confusion about what yoga is because we've been influenced by so many man-made philosophies and interpretations. But if you were to put these man-made philosophies to one side and go back to the very birth of yoga, which I see that as being the conversation between Shiva and Devi, you see that yoga is about transformation, is about evolving, is about finding the truth for yourself and not blindly believing core texts. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but the point I'm trying to make is yoga doesn't demand or ask you for faith in a particular text. Yoga only asks that you have faith in yourself and that you will find and seek the truth for yourself. And you could be of any background, you could be of any religion, and find that yoga helps you get closer towards your goal rather than take you away from your religion, which is what so many people think yoga does. As I've written about in my book at length, there are traditions, there are Sufis from India back in the day who would use yoga as a means of finding that closeness. They would use meditation techniques that would help them find the path towards their goal, in the same way Buddhists use yoga techniques, and so do Jains. All these religions have a different idea of what the ultimate goal is, whether it's submission to God, or whether it's to go to heaven, or whether it's to release themselves from the cycle of rebirths. They all believe in something different, and they can use the yoga techniques, the breathing exercises, the concentration exercises to help them come closer and closer to their eventual goal. I cannot say this enough. Yoga is not a religion. It can be religious, but that doesn't make it a religion.